All right, I'm back today to talk about Sun's exaltation in the sign of Aries. And the way that I'm planning this out is that as Sun ingresses throughout the year of 2025 and 2026, each month I will cover the Sun in that sign. So we're going to start with Sun's exaltation, since this is the next ingress of the Sun into the sign of Aries. And before we start, if you find this video and the content of this channel valuable to you, please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. And you know how I feel about your comments. Comment, and I love commenting back and collaborating, thinking with you. And being an astrologer can sometimes be very lonely because no one else speaks astrology. So speaking to you guys, it's also a pleasure for me. You can also visit my website at parisayazi.com. There you can find my reading services, general chart reading, and life narrative counseling. We look at your chart. We constantly just use your chart as your blueprint, and my courses are also there. You can also go to the About section of YouTube. All the links are there as well for your convenience. Now, without further ado, let us begin. Oh yeah, one more thing, the video is timestamped, so if you guys want to go back and forth to check out different topics, please feel free to do so. Now, without further ado, let us begin. So I'd like to just give you a brief outline of what I'm going to discuss in this video regarding Sun and the sign of Aries. So we're going to talk about the fundamentals of what we generally need to know about signs and planets, specifically Sun and Aries, to be able to make those symbolic combination, melt them together to get the interpretation out of it. Then I'm going to discuss why the Sun is exalted in the sign of Aries. Then I'm going to get into more in depth of the symbolic interpretation, the core motivations that comes out of this combination. And lastly, I'm going to talk about something that we shouldn't generally think about exalted planets, or when planets are in their own sign. We can't, and I'm saying this because we can't give an exalted sign a negative connotation. However, we're human beings, we're flawed, we're constantly learning things. I mean, look at the way we come into this world. We're like these pooping, spitting, falling machines. And with experience, we gain mastery over different domains of life. And exalted planets in our chart are not exempt from this rule. They're in fact talking about a certain kind of an expectation, a kind of a potentiality that's invested within us, that we have to live and learn how to express this potential. So that road to mastery, that road to fullest expression of this placement comes with its own trials and errors. So when I'm talking about the difficulties of Sun in Aries, I don't want you to think I'm problematizing this placement because its symbolic interpretation doesn't lend itself to that. But that is something that I'm going to discuss towards the end of this video. So in that sense, we're going to be talking about some life lessons for Sun and Aries people. And before we get to the nitty-gritties and the details of it, I'm just going to quickly list out Sun symbols and Aries symbols. So you just get a feel for what kinds of things are we bringing into relation, combining and merging them to get some sort of a meaning out of it. And let's start with the Sun. The key symbol for the Sun is the soul. It represents consciousness, how we are the center of our own being. It represents the self, ego, identity, our sense of I. Every time we use the word I in a sentence, this is the Sun factor. So it's saying something about our self-concept. The Sun also has to do with vitality. It's life-generating and it's life-supporting, hence it's related to health. The Sun also represents light. Clearly, it's one of the brightest things in the sky. It's what lights up the world in general. So it represents daytime, vision, clarity, visibility, and for this reason, it represents the public, and it also represents fame. If you think about it, fame's like having a spotlight on us, and then we shine. We become very visible. And because the Sun lights the path, it represents purpose, that fire element of it, that aspect of it that illuminates. It represents career, because career is supposed to say something about our sense of purpose in this life. It's our calling. And we go down that path and we pursue. And then the Sun, if you think about the Sun as a center of the solar system, everything's orbiting around it. So it becomes something that's very foundational at the center. And for this reason, it's related to stability, reliability. It's about supporting others as well as leading others. And if we take it outside this context of being the center, the Sun rises in the east and the Sun sets in the west. If we take any day of the year and we look at it year after year, on that day of the year, the sun rises at the same location of the sky and it sets at the same location. So that reliability and being regular and stable is also coming from that aspect of the sun. And when we take all of these components into consideration, then we can see why is it that the sun represents clarity, decisiveness, authority, confidence. The sun represents kings, those in the position of power who are leading other people. It's about governments, bosses, managers, and the sun represents the father. And in general, we could say the sun is representing power, a very central force and a central power, a central figure. That's what the sun represents. Now, let's go to the sign of Aries and see what Aries symbolizes. Aries is about self-determination, self-governance. It's about forward propulsion and forward movement. And it's a movement that has a trajectory. It has a direction. It's inceptive. It's initiative. It's about energy, strength, penetration, bravery. It's also about passion, adventure, independence, being self-reliant, and it's very individualistic. And another thing to remember about the sign of Aries is the first sign of the zodiac after the sign of Pisces. I mean, in the previous videos recently, I've talked a lot about the sign of Pisces and this dynamic with Aries. The sign of Pisces, it's taking different individuated components of existence. It is incorporating them together and making them lose their differentiation. So it becomes a site of potentiality. Aries as the next sign, as the first sign of the zodiac, as the commencement month of the year, it is talking about taking from that sea of potentiality and bursting forth, individuating as something very distinct into the world, where now, with that energy, force, and vitality invested within it, it can direct itself and it can act. So this is a core quality of Aries. Now, if you've been watching the house series that I've been doing, for example, Sun through the houses, we got to take a set of rules, because that's what astrology is a system with a set of rules. And we have to understand what pertains to interpreting a house. Like, is it in a public sector, in a private sector, amongst other rules? Like, is it a moksha house? Is it a dharmic house? So it has rules. When we come to the signs too, the signs also have certain rules. And we have to always take those into consideration when we're defining a planet and what it might do in that sign. So the first thing to remember, the sign of Aries has been designated to Mars. So Mars is the real estate owner of the sign of Aries. Another thing we have to remember about the signs, are they saying something about that existential feminine principle or the masculine principle? The feminine principle is intaking, so it's receptive. The masculine principle is outward moving and it's inceptive. Mars and Sun, the sign of Aries as well, they are all of the masculine principle. So they all have this externalizing motion, and it's about moving outwards, and it's very action oriented externally. Now, the element of Aries is fire. So it's its ruler Mars, and so is the sun. And understanding the elements of the signs are very important, because we know when we put Aries, Sun, and the ruler Mars, when it comes to the symbolic meaning of fire, we're talking about light, heat. We're talking about catalysts, how things act as a catalyst for something else. We're talking about ignition, action, activity. We're talking about power. The fire element is also related to being moral and being dharmic. I will explain this as we go through the video. And the fire element has to do with purification. Then another thing we have to realize about, or the rule pertaining to sign. So the ruler of that sign, is it a friend with the planet that's going and sitting in there? So planetary friendships become something very important. And we know that the sun is a great friend of Mars, and Mars is a great friend of the sun. There's a lot of respect between these two planets. So when the sun comes into the sign of Aries, which is Mars' sign, wherever else Mars is sitting, Mars is trying its darn hardest to support the sun and what the sun needs. It's like a house guest that you love, that friend you love them coming over your house, and you just bend backwards to make sure that their stay is very pleasant and memorable. Another thing to remember about the signs, they have these directional modes. So the sign of Aries is a cardinal sign, and it's not any cardinal sign. It's a cardinal direction of the east. And what happens in the east? The sun rises in the east. So this is one of the reasons why sun is exalted here. So not only sun has directional strength, but it is also where the sun becomes visible, is where life comes into life, is the emergence of life, of light. So this is this cardinal aspect of Aries, which is pertaining to the eastern direction, is very important. And the cardinal signs in general, they're saying like, okay, we're gonna start moving from that dual aspect, like let's say in Pisces, the sign before the sign of Aries, which can either go to this direction or that direction. I'm going to choose. I'm going to decisively choose a direction, and I'm going to move that way. So it's initiating a new beginning by decisively taking things into a new direction. And with the sun rising in the east, the day coming into being, this new direction is saying something about generating life, bringing life into life. And the sign of Aries, another thing to remember, I've discussed this at length in the Planet and Houses videos, but the signs too, they have a trine, like all the fire signs are going to be a trine to each other. So if we put Aries in the natural zodiac in the first house, so we got the fire houses or the dharmic houses all trining each other. So that'll be the first house, fifth house, and ninth house. Now, if we inject the signs into these natural houses, we have Aries, Leo, and Sag. And these houses and these signs are very much related to the part of life that we call our dharma. I'll get into more of the details of this as we go on, which has to do with our moral integrity and our sense of purpose. And as I explained earlier, the sun is very much related to our sense of purpose, hence why it represents our career. So now let's get a little bit deeper into this idea of why is the sun exalted in the sign of Aries. And I want you to remember, sun is exalted in the sign of Aries, but for all exaltation, there's a particular degree that that planet is at the seat of his power. And when a planet is exalted, all that it means is that what the planet is about and what it's trying to do, that sign really accommodates it. And when the sun comes into the sign of Aries, the question here becomes which degree is it that is most supportive to the sun? So the sun is like, not only in its friend's house, this is my favorite room, and look what Mars has set up in this room, and I feel so comfortable. And that's the 20th degree of the sign of Aries, is a specific exaltation degree of the sun in the sign of Aries. We can attach two factors to why the sun is exalted in the sign of Aries. One of it is related to the symbolism of the sun and the sign of Aries coming into connection with each other. And the other ones are astronomical, and I'll touch on both of them. So let's start with the symbolic resonance between Sun and Aries. The first thing that we have to remember, first and foremost, the sun and the sign of Aries are related to the masculine principle. And I know some people are sensitive about using the word masculine and they like to use the word yang, but it's not encompassing the symbolic history of these planets. I'm not talking about political ideology here. I'm talking about the language of symbols. And if you guys really do have a word that can be exchanged for this, and it can encompass the alchemy, the astrology, the symbolic language that runs deep through human history, please do let me know and we'll change them. And if you guys want to take yin and yang, that tradition, we're bastardizing that tradition because that's a philosophical school of thought where it has its own meaning designated to it. So I just want to make that clear, because sometimes I will get messages that this masculine and feminine is a language of discrimination. That is not how I'm using it. Just want to put that into context. And I've talked about this in other videos too. But going back, both the sun and the sign of Aries are related to the masculine principle, which is an existential function that is talking about that which is external moving, that which is externally active, and it has the capacity to externally initiate. Now, there's something worth thinking about here. The core symbols of the sun represent the soul, consciousness, and the self. It's hard to say the soul is something external. Same with consciousness, because your personal consciousness is contained within you. And the self really has a meaning within itself, right? But all of these components of the self need to be operationalized externally so that the soul can have an experience of itself. So the soul comes into this world to have an experience of itself through the external reality, which we call this reality we live in. Consciousness is the way to have this external experience. And the self becomes the doer who engages with this external reality, who then needs the feminine principle, that receptive factor, to take it in to the mind, such as the moon, to be able to process it and to feel it. So we can see the symbolism of the sun, even though they are saying something about the internal function of things, it's contingent on some external factor to have an experience. So this masculine principle of the sun is, how do I externalize this core soul level, consciousness level, the self? How do I externalize it out in the world to have an experience of it? And to also let others experience it, because the sun represents light. So we illuminate ourselves for other. We become part of that reality where we can also be experienced. And then if we come to a more mundane level, the masculine principle, because of that outward moving factor that's related to it, it can represent authority. It can be self-asserting. So it can thrust itself forward into the world. And both the sun and the sign of Aries have this quality. If you think back to the key symbols that I was describing for both of them. So this masculine principle brings them into this kind of a resonance again. So the sign of Aries accommodates that individuation of the self, that express form of it as something very distinct in the world, where it can make a claim of, this is who I am. I exist. I am. The I belongs to the sun. I am, which is the act of the I, is being supported in the sign of Aries. And the way it allows the self to act itself as that center, as someone who has an authority over themselves, as someone who's self-possessed, self-governed, someone with clarity, decisiveness. So we can see all this masculine principle between the sign and the sun are in complete resonance and helping the sun to express its higher potential and full potential. You know, when I think about sun in Aries, I think about the movie Gladiator as an archetype, to just imagine like what kind of a person is he at the highest potential and the highest expression of it. What was his name? Something Maximus. I think everyone has seen the movie Gladiator. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And I'll talk more about this. I'll actually use this archetype when it comes to the Dharma aspect of this, to the leadership aspect of this combination. But that's just something to keep in mind as we talk about Sun in Aries. So I don't know if you guys notice or not, my voice is getting uneven. I'm just going to grab a sip of water. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Inevitable, right? Talking about so much fire and speaking, and I have my Sun in Gemini. The voice has to get fried. But let's go to the next set of resonance, which is about the fire elements of the sun and the fire element of Aries. And we should also take into consideration that the ruler of Aries, Mars, is also fire. So fire is outward moving and is upward moving. So right away it's telling us something about the active principle. That's what's operationalizing thing. It's action oriented. It acts as a catalyst. It catalyzes and initiates things. And then we know fire heats things up, burns things up. So it's representing energy. And the sun represents energy and vitality. So you can see that this furnace of the life force, the sun, is coming into the sign of Aries. And it's not going to run out of energy. That energy and vitality is constantly being injected into the sun, by the sign of Aries. That was a tongue twister. So the sun is exalted here because the sign of Aries is upholding the qualities of the sun. It's complementing it and it's fueling it. Like you put the sun in a water sign, it starts to fizzle out. It's not giving it that extra energy, which itself needs, which is fire. It's getting this from the sign of Aries. So in that sense, the sun becomes a highest expression of itself. It becomes life generating. It becomes a center that is life promoting and life preserving. It energizes. Now let's move to another set of resonance, which has to do with the planetary friendships. As I mentioned earlier, Sun and Mars are great friends. You have the king and you have the general of the army. They're tight. They know each other's secrets. They know how to communicate. One knows how to take orders, one knows how to give it, but just in the right way so that things get done. And we got to remember the ruler of Aries, Mars, he's the planet of action. He's the muscles. He is about strength, bravery, courage, initiative. And Mars is very logical. So Mars gets it. When Mars gets the order from the sun, it understands how point A is related to point B as a destination. And the shortest distance between point A and B is just direct motion. No curvature, no zigzagging. I got the order, I'm on it, I'm going. So what is this doing for the sun? It's allowing the sun to express itself fully. It doesn't need to censor itself. It doesn't need to sugarcoat things. It doesn't need to waste time. And Sun and Aries people have this quality. So it's taking that boldness that's in the sign of Aries, that when you put a planet here that's debilitated or suffering, that boldness just comes out as rudeness almost. The person's just, that bluntness is not nice. But when you have the sun here, it's assertive. It's just giving the directions as it should be given. So we're talking about that leading quality, that leadership that comes with the sun. Sun knows how to express itself here. It's clear. And what is being expressed has a lot of vitality and energy in it. So here, the person can, through the way that they're expressing themselves and putting themselves in the world, motivate and initiate, create that initiation in other people also to start being active and activating them. So Mars here is providing the sun with everything that the sun needs to be the highest expression of itself without censorship and without watering it down, without draining it. And then that cardinal quality, that's a point of resonance, as I mentioned before. And I was saying that the sun represents vision and purpose, right? This placement is saying that the person has a clear vision about the direction that they're going to choose. There's also fearlessness in understanding, hey, that last time that I did this, it didn't change. I need to change direction. They're not going to act like a broken record. So being able to initiate a new beginning or revitalizing something that needs to be done. Sun in Aries is very apt at doing this. And because of that clarity and vision, the sun here can have this very vivid power within itself to assess, to point itself at something, direct itself towards that new beginning and begin and commence doing that. It just knows how to implement the right actions. In some, we can say that the sun here knows how to have purposeful action. It doesn't just act for the sake of acting. And you know, there's something cyclical about the sun. The sun sets every day and then the sun rises and there's the commencement of a new day. There's no hesitation. Like, do I rise today or do I not? We know on this day of the year, the sun will always rise at 6:45 a.m. So it's also talking about some inherent existential and cosmic order with this initiation too. So it's not random initiation and I'm just going to constantly change my mind and have a new beginning. It's ordered. It's reliable. It's like an orchestrated new beginning. It's not random and chaotic here in the sign of Aries. Which Aries can do that to other planets because you just have this impulse. That impulsivity comes out. I just need to act. I need to act. And then it doesn't really add up to anything. There's a sense of chaos almost about it, but not with the sun here. Now, these were some of the symbolic resonances. And you know what? We can talk about the symbolic resonance for like 25 hours. And who knows, maybe if there's time and I can wrap my brain year after year, I'll come back and I'll do another sun through the sign series and discuss more factors, but we got to put some sort of a time cap on this so we get to the end of it. So now let's go to some of the astronomical factors that makes the sun exalted in the sign of Aries. So Aries marks the first cardinal point of the zodiac, and Aries is representing the vernal equinox in the northern hemisphere. That's something to remember. So this is representing the balance between darkness and light, daytime and nighttime. And it's from this point that the daylight is expanding, becoming longer and longer till we have the summer solstice in June. So naturally, it's talking about a place that is allowing the light to grow. Not only it's allowing it to come into the seat of its power, but it's also positioning it in a way that it can now expand and become longer, like longer days. And as I was saying earlier, the sun represents daytime, light, and visibility. So the sign of Aries becomes the commencement of this. So it's talking about some inherent quality that is of the sun. It's allowing the sun to express one of its powers in this way. And, the sun represents vision as in sight. When things are lit, we actually see things. We become more conscious. You can think of consciousness as light. It is the ability to experience. And what can you experience? You experience what you can see, what's visible to you. And then what's visible to you allows you to have a higher expression of yourself because you know what you're in relationship with or to at that point. So in the sign of Aries, the sun representing the self gets a fuller expression of itself to make it known and visible. And then another thing to remember, Aries symbolizes the eastern cardinal direction. And we know the east is related to the sunrise. The sun is rising to its power and it's initiating a new beginning, like sunrise every day is initiating a new day. In Aries, we're talking about the Zodiacal new year, and it's denoting the triumph of life over death, of light over darkness, of warmth over cold. And I talked about this in another video with the Sun-Saturn conjunction. What is the antithesis of all this? It's Saturn, right? We're talking about from winter to spring. So in the sign of Aries, the sun starts to get that core signification of its essence, which is about being life generating. It's the life generating principle. It is the organizing principle that permits life to exist and to come into being. And the sign of Aries is about individuation of that life form from that sea of potentiality in Pisces to now burst forth in life. We see this in spring. Like one night you go to sleep and there are no cherry blossoms anywhere. The next morning you wake up and it's like, doof, they're everywhere. So that's another meaning that we can designate to sun's exaltation in the sign of Aries. And another thing we can give to this astronomical component, that Aries is like the sunrise of the year. And when we get that first day of spring, you can cast the charts for the entire year, which is kind of telling you what the entire year would look like. Because that's the commencement of the next 12 months with the rising of the sun in the east. So again, the sun here becomes the source of light, vitality, life, energy, and new beginnings, which all of them are mirroring its other symbolism of generating life again. So the sunrise of the year is the commencement of new life into life. And then going back to that whole tree, cherry blossoms and the trees and the fire and the Aries sign with a fire element that is of cardinal energy, we can see how it aligns with the spring season, initiating new beginnings. And that new beginning is generally related to life. Animals start to do their mating. It's one of their mating seasons. So it's saying something about that ignition, the catalyst that gives rise to new beginnings, which pertains to life. And we know that sun is life promoting and life generating. It's not necessarily life preserving, because all we have to do is look at the sign of Leo. At the end of summer, everything's burnt out. But you cannot have life without the sun. One of the reasons why there is life on Earth is our right distance from the sun. Without the sun, we would just freeze and die. We wouldn't even be in orbit of something. We'll just be rogue and probably crashing into other things. We're being led by the sun, and the life that exists on Earth is because of the sun. So the sign of Aries is telling us that when the sun comes here, there's a momentum for life now. The life force can come forth. It can individuate. It can come into being. It can have a form where the form itself can now act and exist as some sort of a masculine principle in itself because it is manifest and it exists.